Thanks everyone for joining us today, and welcome to our webinar, CAEL, A Clear Path to Academic Achievement in Canada Redefined. My name is Riley Cohen. I'm the CEO of CanadaVisa. And today we are excited to have CAEL with us to go over the CAEL Path to Success, a comprehensive step-by-step guide of valuable tools and strategies to prepare you for test day, while also helping you identify a clear roadmap for your preparation journey. The CAEL test is developed by language experts in Canada and accepted and highly regarded by all English-speaking academic institutions across Canada. The CAEL exam is designed to reflect the specificities of the Canadian academic context. It mirrors the Canadian classroom experience and demonstrates the skills needed to succeed in a post-secondary environment. The Student Direct Stream program accepts CAEL results for expedited study permit applications. Today, we're lucky to have a CAEL expert with us, Ivan Petrov. Ivan is the Manager of Business Development for Prometric's language acquisition portfolio for Western Canada and the United States and Asia. As Manager of Business Development, Ivan supports the assessment mandates of academic institutions, governments, and strategic stakeholders, focusing on improving meaningful and equitable outcomes for institutions and learners. In the past, Ivan served as an account director and manager of academic relations for Prometric's English language and prior learning assessment programs, and spent years working in experimental learning and edtech, focusing on the U.S. academic ecosystem, public policy, and academia. Ivan holds a BA from the University of Toronto and MA from the University of Toronto's Monk School of Global Affairs. Thanks for joining us, Ivan. Ivan's going to present today for about 30 minutes, and then we'll move to the question and answer portion of the webinar. Many of you submitted questions prior to this webinar, and we're going to try to get to as many as possible. You are also invited to submit questions regarding the CAEL test in the chat. We have a team of moderators that will choose questions from the chat. As a friendly reminder, please refrain from sharing any personal information as the chat is public. And then also note that the webinar is being recorded and you will receive a recording with the slides via email following the webinar. So thanks again for joining. Thank you, Ivan, for presenting for us. And without further ado, we will start with the presentation.
Wonderful. Thank you. Well, thanks again to everyone who's joined us, and many thanks to CanadaVisa for bringing us together. This is probably one of the favorite parts of my job, where I get to tell you a little bit about this test, but I also get to tell you about my experience with CAEL, other people's experience with CAEL, and some of the strategies that we have developed over the course of many years that helps folks like you, folks like me, who are interested in studying and working in Canada. So, a clear path to academic achievement in Canada Redefined. CAEL, we think and we know from conversations with academic institutions that it is a very powerful predictor of academic and employment success in Canada. In today's presentation, I will give you a very brief overview of what the test is, and I'll spend more time in telling you where to get the resources needed, not just to get a great score on CAEL and obviously support your stellar application to universities, but also how you can begin to gain lifelong skills that will position you for success within the Canadian context. Very briefly, CAEL, as I mentioned a moment ago, is a very robust computer-delivered test for all of you folks who are applying to universities and colleges in Canada. It stands for the Canadian Academic English Language Exam, and that in itself really tells you a lot about what you need to know about it. And that is, A, it's Canadian, so it's made in Canada many years ago, very robust, very comprehensive, but also very human. It is very academic in its essence, unlike other tests who would test your everyday English facility. This one is strictly going to focus on how you perform in academic contexts, and those would include not just what you do in the classroom, but also how you interact with your peers and professors on a social setting. And finally, it's available online from the comfort of your home or at an authorized test center across Canada and internationally. and we will see in a moment where exactly the test is available. One thing that I will say immediately here is that for those of you who are familiar with the SDS pathway, it's important to note that those results will only be accepted if they are if you obtain them at a test center. So if you were to take CAEL online, for instance, those would not qualify for the SDS pathway. The price of the test is $280 Canadian plus tax. It's available twice weekly, typically Fridays and Saturdays if you're taking the online version. You can also check with your local test center if you're taking it in person at a test center. Those dates might vary. They're not necessarily Friday and Saturday. Your test results, i.e. transcripts, are available within 8 days. And importantly, they come straight to you within your account on CAEL.ca. So as soon as you create an account, you schedule your test, you hold a test, everything happens directly there. There's nothing for you to do additionally. Now, those scores can be sent up to 5 institutions, which is free of charge. And if you wanted to send scores to other institutions above and beyond the 5 that are already included in your account, those would be a charge of $20 per transcript. Because of the fact that this is an incredibly well-regarded test, which I will show you more about that in a moment, it's also accepted in literally all English-speaking Canadian universities. Now the number is much higher, I think, than 180 because the Canadian landscape is one that's incredibly diverse and dynamic. So there are other institutions that are being created as we speak, and as soon as they do open their doors, obviously CAEL is there to support them. So point is, if you're looking for the particular institution to which you are applying, there is the link directly here in the slide that tells you exactly which institutions accept CAEL. So it's a very comprehensive list. Not to spend too much time on that, but these are some of the institutions that accept CAEL. You can see colleges like Centennial, Douglas, George Brown, Humber, but also large institutions, in fact, world-renowned institutions like the University of Toronto, which I think ranks somewhere around 25 in world rankings, followed by McGill, which also accepts CAEL, and UBC. So these are the top 3 universities. For folks that are keen to get into them, obviously CAEL would be a perfect pathway to do that. As I mentioned immediately when we started, because SDS is an important pathway for a lot of folks, that obviously saves a great deal of time. As of August of last year, CAEL results are accepted as long as they're taken at a test center. Again, you know, if you were to take the exam online, fantastic. You can support your regular application through a university directly, but if you're looking for the SDS expedited study permit pathway, then you have to take your CAEL test at a test center. Speaking of which, there are currently 14 countries with test centers available worldwide. Again, if you scroll down to the bottom of this slide, and for those of you viewing this slide deck at a later date, that will be very important because likely the number of countries that accept, or rather the number of countries in which we have test centers would have increased. It literally grows on a weekly basis. So point is, there are currently 14 countries with test centers availability for CAEL, and I would encourage you all to look at the closest one directly in the list in the bottom of the slide. Now, what makes CAEL unique? Why would folks consider taking it? Again, the big theme here is CAEL is not just a pathway to getting a high score. It's also a pathway to having a meaningful academic and later on employment experience here in Canada. It is very comprehensive, and it stimulates real-world academic activities and social interactions. Most importantly, another thing that we keep hearing from folks that have taken CAEL and perhaps have experience with other tests, it's done in one sitting. In other words, all 5 components, which we will see in a moment, are done at the same time. You no longer have to come back and take the speaking portion of the test at a separate date. Sometimes you have to do this on the same date, but as a separate sitting with other tests. Well, here, it's all done in one fell swoop. And importantly, it's also done in front of a computer where you, perhaps if you're a little bit apprehensive when it comes to your speaking ability, you don't really have to worry about that because you're not speaking directly to a person. Your answers are recorded through a computer, and then 2 or 3 independent raters, human raters obviously, will assess those at a later date. The point is, while you're speaking, you can rest assured and you don't have to be apprehensive about the fact that you may be coming across in a certain way. That thing is completely as a non-starter. So a lot of people find it very convenient. Which is one of the reasons why admissions offices consider CAEL a very rigorous assessment. It really helps them, i.e. the Canadian institutions, recruit and retain outstanding talent worldwide. And a lot of the folks that are taking these exams, a lot of the candidates, really are aiming not just to perhaps get a score and get into universities. They actually have a pathway that they've designated for themselves, and they want to be highly achieving academically inclined people. And therefore, for them, it's important to get in at precise universities that they've already identified. They've already perhaps even given thoughts about their chosen field of study and have been preparing for some time in order to get them to succeed. And that's exactly what Canadian institutions are looking for. At the tail end of our presentation, you'll see how much free study materials are also available, which again is all in support to your journey to coming to Canada and having an incredible academic experience and then employment experience down the line as well. Really, as I keep saying, as you can see here in the slide, it is a path to academic and employment success. It really is highly regarded by the academic community. And the reason why specifically they think that this works really well is because it ensures that candidates know what to expect on day one of their academic instruction in Canada, which for a lot of institutions also reduces the time to degree completion and boosts their graduation rates. Additionally, we have found that candidates who complete the exam prep pathway that we are going to discuss in a moment gain actual lifelong skills and the kind of proficiency and confidence that you simply can't fake. In a sense, like that stays with you and makes you consistently more competitive in the Canadian job market. Many of you are aware, perhaps, that the style of teaching in academia has shifted in recent years. So if until recently we had the standard lecture style learning in which you have a professor effectively telling you about a certain subject where you're taking notes, but the professor is effectively just presenting. And then you come away with that, you do your reading, you come back and you do your assignments. Those things are, in a sense, a thing of the past. Now we function in a flipped classroom style learning setting in which everything is very interactive. Everything you do will be involving presentations and speeches, a lot of discussions with peers, a lot of working with groups. And the point here is that you need an assessment tool that not only gives you a pertinent understanding of what those activities would look like, but it also gives you a pertinent pathway to get there and feel that you are prepared for what these activities would look like. Here we have outlined some of the things that you should be paying attention to as you prepare for your tests, but again, for your academic journey in Canada. Supporting academic activities are the ones that effectively allow you to do the thing that I mentioned a moment ago, discussing the goals, reading instructions, library presentations, and then social activities are the ones that you obviously do, or social activities on campus are actually a very important tool for success and academic and psychological well-being. And therefore, CAEL allows you to start gleaning an insight into what those might look like when you get here to Canada. And then finally, obviously, the strongest portion of the CAEL test is its ability to test and prepare you for those core academic activities, which are all integrated in a way that is holistic and actually prepares you for day one of academic instruction in Canada. Before we move on to the pathway to success, these are the 5 components of the CAEL test. You have speaking, integrated reading, integrated listening, academic unit A, and academic unit B. It takes approximately 3 hours to complete the test. And as I mentioned a moment ago, it's done in one sitting. The important thing here to note is that with the exception of the speaking component, all are integrated. And what this means is that every task you complete also has an indication to the task that you're about to complete in your next setting, which is very similar to the way we operate in a classroom setting. Now, this is the part that I would love for everyone to focus on, even those, particularly those who are seeing the slide deck at a later date. The thing that I mentioned in the onset of our presentation, this is a pathway to success that many people have taken in the past. It is all available to you within your account, and it is completely free of charge. So the moment you create an account on CAEL.ca is the moment when all of these resources are available to you. One of the things that we suggest doing is attending, as soon as you create an account, just attend one of the CAEL 101 webinars, which are an overview, effectively, conducted by 1 or 2 CAEL experts. Sometimes folks would come from universities as well to co-present. The CAEL 101 effectively gives you a really good understanding of the format of the test, of the types of questions that you can expect. And armed with that knowledge, you can move on to take a sample CAEL test, which again is available directly within your account. The sample test, which is the second little bubble that you see there, as you can imagine, allows you to understand exactly what, not only do you now know what the types of questions would be on the test, but now having completed the sample test, you also know where you stand in terms of your proficiency with the individual subjects and components of the test, which then allows you to understand where you need to go and improve on particular aspects of, let's say, your writing or reading or speaking ability. Having done that, you can now move to one of the many CAEL live sessions, which effectively would feature not only CAEL experts, but also admissions folks, language experts, people who teach CAEL, but most importantly, on occasion, they would also feature candidates or test takers that have maybe just taken a CAEL test. So they know exactly what that experience was like. Those I find very interactive and a great tool to not only understand what other people have gone through, but also kind of reduce your apprehension at this point. If you think that you're getting yourself into something that is perhaps a little daunting, those live sessions actually go a long way in saying, no, it's fine, you will all be okay, because again, there's a wealth of knowledge and a bunch of people here who are vested in your success. From there, you can move and be more granular with the 201, the 200 series, but also 300 series courses that you can see outlined there. So CAEL 201, for instance, is going to give you a granular, in-depth, laser focus on speaking, on the speaking test format. From there, we recommend you go to 301, which is, again, another session on speaking, moving on to writing, reading, and listening, and so on and so forth, until you get to, after you've completed a bunch of these in-depth courses, because that's effectively what they are, and this is part of the reason why we say that CAEL really is a path to success. Like, we really have put this very robust, comprehensive package that effectively not just ensures that you get to the score that you need, but you also gain the level of experience and confidence that you need. And the one thing that is incredibly important to do in this stage is probably take a little break and understand what all the additional CAEL study materials look like. So now at this point, you already know a lot about the additional materials that may be useful for you. And this is where they all are. Like, effectively, you don't have to avail yourself of all of them. You now know, ideally, what else you need to support your journey. Finally, there is an option to do a CAEL pretest. And again, this is almost the same as the sample test that you take ideally in the beginning of your journey. But the pretest now is an actual test, effectively, that gives you the confidence that, hey, maybe you have started your journey with a certain skill set and you've taken that first sample test and you've identified some of your gaps. But now at this point, you can really understand how far you've come. And therefore, you're ideally ready to score really highly on the CAEL test on exam date. At that point, obviously, a good night's rest, and then welcome in test day. Again, for all of you on this call, but also folks that are checking out the slide deck at a later date, this slide here is the thing that makes, I think, a big difference in terms of how you get prepared and in terms of how confident you are when you get to test date. The final thought here before we move to other things I want to show you is the following. At any point during this journey, the ability to connect with one of us is always there for you. Not only is this created by people who are consummate professionals and care deeply about meaningful outcomes for candidates and test takers, but those same people are likely available to effectively, whenever you feel stuck, you can always reach out to customer service and ask questions. Those take priority for us internally. And so you will never, as it were, walk alone. Whenever you need us, we'll be there. So the reason why you want a high score, just to visualize what your transcript looks like, is so that you can get one of these. And ideally, for most institutions, you would want to be scoring 60 and up. As we mentioned earlier, you can send these score reports up to five institutions free of charge. And if you are applying to more institutions, then those would be still available to you, but unfortunately we'll have to charge you a $20 fee. In most cases, folks don't ever get to that point because ideally you've kind of narrowed down your preferred area of study and institution that you'd like to enroll in. But it's often the case sometimes that because these results are available for 2 years, at some point you may decide to apply to a different institution. So that's why we have the ability to send additional transcripts for $20 each. And again, accessing your scores is always an easy thing. This is all available to you directly in your account. Just to put everything that we talked about in the path to success in more visual terms, if you ever get stuck into one of the points along the journey, this here, I feel, is a very visual way of understanding what each of those sessions that we talked about a moment ago really entails. What is the sample test? What is a study guide? And what these individual sections and training sessions would do for you. So I would encourage you again to retain this slide deck as well, and keep referring to it alongside the various student preparation support that we have online. I don't know if I mentioned this already, but we do pride ourselves on having a very robust community of folks who have either gone through the process or continuing as we speak to go through the process. But also, this is where a lot of our experts interact directly with our candidates. So I will share at the very end of this presentation all the various social media channels where you can interact with us. But this is also a very important tool that in most cases, I think, kind of alleviates the apprehension that may exist as we prepare for these exams. And so, just to reiterate why it is important to prepare well, what does this do for you when you come to Canada? What have we heard from institutions? And we've kind of summarized it here in this slide. So students who take CAEL and score highly, let's say 60 plus, they typically require less language support from university instructors. This is self-explanatory, but also it's great news for the institutions, i.e., your application is likely to be regarded with greater importance once you suggest to them, to the admitting institution, that you have a very high proficiency in the English language. In other words, they now know that they can start teaching the subject matter as opposed to having to spend resources in making sure that you are at the level that you're supposed to be at this stage of academic instruction. Therefore, you are likely to be regarded as possessing the actual skills necessary for academic success in Canada. Again, the pathway to success actually gets you there because it is very pertinent. It is very pertinent to the Canadian context. It tests, but also prepares you and the skill sets that you require to succeed here in Canada. As a result, these students would also tend to get more experiential learning and co-op opportunities. I don't know to what degree I may be preaching to the choir here, but and to what degree candidates really want to come to Canada because of those experiential learning and co-op opportunities. But this is becoming exceptionally important in today's context, where it's super important to know the likelihood and expect almost the likelihood of finding a meaningful job upon graduation. A major pathway to finding these jobs is getting yourself into a program, but also becoming more competitive directly on day one when it comes to scoring experiential learning and co-op opportunities. What these are effectively, and they're becoming more available directly in year 1, year 2, year 3 of academic instruction. Those are your ability to connect with potential employers or to gain Canadian working experience directly while you're in school. So clearly, being proficient and having the ability to communicate well when you get to these first year, second year, third year co-op opportunities positions you immediately as a higher likelihood candidate to get those very crucial experiential learning opportunities, which of course at the end of that academic experience means that you have better employment outcomes upon graduation. So again, there's a great deal of thought and resources that has gone into preparing folks to be authentically well prepared, well adjusted, very competitive when it comes to not just getting into university, but immediately thinking about what those outcomes will be upon graduation. For those of us who've been through this, 4 years can be a very short period of time, and it's very important to be as strategic as possible on day one. Finally, literally my favorite part of all of this, and if I haven't convinced you already that there are a lot of resources here to support you, I'm hoping that this would go a long way in that regard, and that is we offer 30,000 Canadian dollars in scholarships for international students. This applies for both graduate and undergraduate programs. Very simply, there's a $15,000 first place award. The runner-up gets $10,000, and the third place gets awarded $5,000. And all you have to do is, and you can, by the way, you can apply directly within your account. I keep repeating that everything happens directly in your account, and that is exactly the case. You don't have to do anything more. But the point here is that when you take an exam and you score 60 plus, all we want to hear from you about is effectively what made you choose a certain program. What was your journey about? What aspirations did you or your family have for coming to Canada and studying in a particular program? In other words, a short essay that supports your application. That's effectively what you need to do in order to be considered for the scholarship, for one of the scholarships. At which point, there's a bunch of folks who assess your essay, not just in terms of the content, but obviously we want to look at word usage. We want to make sure that you're writing in a way that is eloquent and interesting. And so if you feel like you are that kind of writer and you have something to say about the reasons why you have chosen to apply to certain institutions and come in Canada, then this would be one wonderful way for us to support you, because as you can imagine, this could be a huge difference maker. Not to be very verbose about it, but like this is great. That's a great resource that effectively can be the difference between you having to rely on additional funding or perhaps family resources and so forth. It can go a long way in establishing a proper academic experience here in Canada, and we're very delighted to obviously support you in that regard. Finally, as I promised, these are all of our social media and student support channels. I do mean it when I say that there are a lot of folks that are vested in your success, and these are all the meaningful ways that you can get in touch with us. Chief among those, of course, is CAEL.ca, and the thing that I would encourage folks to do is just create an account. There's a lot of ways to interact with us the moment you do. And most importantly, all of the resources that I mentioned earlier will be there at your fingertips, and we'll be ready to support you. And that's it. I'm grateful for any opportunity to proselytize about this incredible product. I do think it is a wonderful way to, as I say, not just score a high score, but also be prepared for what Canada entails from an academic setting. And with that, very grateful for the opportunity to have shared some of this with you all.
Thank you so much, Ivan. Wonderful presentation. Big thanks from CanadaVisa and our audience. And with that being said, let's move on to the question and answer portion of this webinar. We got some questions in by email. I know some of you have submitted questions on the form, the sign-up form for the webinar, and we got one or two questions that came in through the chat. So Friendly reminder to don't share any personal information in the chat as we continue forward. And we're still taking questions. So if you have a follow-up question to an answer that Ivan gives us, or another question pops in your mind, please don't be afraid to pop in the chat, and we'll try to get to it at the end of this webinar. So first question came in on the submission form from Saima, who asked, does CAEL count towards PhD admissions too?
And the short answer to that is yes. In fact, a lot of the graduate school departments would regard an application like this very highly. Particularly, of course, you have to check what score that particular department would like to see for your application. But CAEL, particularly for, it's a long answer, but particularly for social sciences, liberal arts, in other words, programs that require a greater deal of proficiency and more eloquence, CAEL is a fantastic tool to use.
Great. Iragena asked this question. It's a bit tangential, but interesting. How can I improve my language skills after landing in Canada?
That is truly a wonderful question. So I'll give you my answer, which is what I've done. Obviously, you can detect an accent which I can probably never get rid of, but it's been a journey for me too. The thing that I did when I came to Canada is I availed myself of the services of the Writing Center at the University of Toronto. And what that meant, and the reason why this ties in with what we were showing earlier, these are the social skills that we were talking about. So in other words, CAEL will prepare you to have the ability to have a conversation on campus with all the tools and resources and all the wonderful folks that can get you there. Academic resources like the Writing Center, library, these people are there to talk to you. And so you can keep improving your language proficiency just by going and saying, I want to improve my language proficiency. In my case, that meant that the Writing Center used to destroy all of my papers, and I used to come back many times and rewrite them. And, 2-3 years of that actually does work. So if you're in for it, that would be a pertinent way to improve.
Great. And on the topic of accents, EK asked on the submission form, I speak English with an accent. Should I be working on that to make me sound more native to Canada? Will that help me on the CAEL exam?
One of the greatest answers I've heard, that's a great question. Another great question. One of the best answers I've heard in recent memory is from one of the language instructors from a university. And they said, it's much more important. Forget about accent. Don't talk about accent. Don't concentrate on accent. Focus on intonation. Focus on meaningful pauses, which still is something that I work on when I speak in public. And so if you think of your speech delivery from the standpoint of intonation, register, and pauses, rather than accent, that goes a long way. And it's also a pertinent way for you to keep improving that, because accent will be there. You can actually make your accent really work for you as long as you keep practicing cadence, pauses, and intonation.
Right. Alexander asked, what are the differences between CAEL and CELPIP?
Great question. Sorry, I'll stop saying this because they're all great questions. But on the onset of the presentation, remember I said CAEL is the Canadian Academic English Language Exam, and it is very academic, whereas CELPIP is another comprehensive test that tests out your ability to use English in a day-to-day basis. So in other words, think of CAEL as the admissions test, strictly speaking, for universities and colleges, and think of CELPIP as the test that allows you to apply for permanent residence, citizenship applications. In other words, it is less academic, very secure, very robust, very human, but it does not test and prepare you for admissions and academic contexts.
Right. And so just to clarify, because a couple people in chat asked about CAEL and express entry or CAEL and permanent residence. Is CAEL valid for express entry?
It is.
Great. What are some common challenges you'd say that test takers face when preparing for the CAEL test? And then how can we overcome those?
I think the biggest one we hear is the apprehension that people have about how daunting of a task it is to prepare and score for score well on CAEL, which is the reason why we always want to ensure that people know that all of these resources are available. So there is a psychological component to all of this. In other words, if you do your sample test in the beginning when you create an account, first of all, that was my case too. I realized that, well, this isn't so bad. Secondly, it gives you an opportunity to determine where you need to go from there in terms of figuring out your areas of improvement. And third, as long as you stay with it, you begin to realize another important point, and that is that, again, there is a whole community of people out there who are on the same journey, who are asking the same questions. And so if you remove that psychological apprehension, you basically start getting into the actual content, and that can be a lot of fun. So that's one, there's a psychological component here, which I think, so do not fret is the main thing here that you need to take away. Mm-hmm. That is the biggest deterrent for a lot of folks. From a technical standpoint, practice makes perfect. I know this is not earth-shattering as a comment, but just practicing on a daily basis with whatever tools you have allows you to see your progression as you go from, the 201, 203, 204, and so forth.
Right. And any tips to manage time effectively during the test? Yes.
So the first thing I'll say is when you look at the path to success, a lot of those sessions will really focus on time management. The one thing that's always worked for me, and I've heard from others too, is follow the prompt and understand the task at hand. In a lot of those cases, if you reread the instructions of a particular task, on the third rereading, you are very clear about what is asked of you. And that's, again, why you need to kind of prepare and have some of these tools under your belt. But the point here is read the instructions really well, understand what that particular instruction is asking you to do. And then before you start writing, just have a brief outline that takes about a minute to create in your mind. So it's pace yourself, read the instructions really, really well. And most importantly, go and check out the sessions that go into depth about what time management is for each individual component.
Right. A lot of questions here about where you can take the CAEL exam. I know we touched on it a bit during the presentation, but maybe you can reiterate where to send people if they have a question about that.
So maybe I can share, in fact, if you give me a moment, I will share a link directly in the chat where people can find a test date. But the best source of information really is, well, either go back to the slide deck. There is a link there that says where you can schedule tests. But also, if you just go to cael.ca and you create an account, directly in there, you will be able to find out the online locations. So there are a lot of countries in which CAEL is already available online. And also, if you need to take the test for the purposes of SDS, which has to be taken at a test center, those links are available directly in your account as well. But if I can, I will share this in the chat, and you folks let me know whether you can see that okay.
Great, thank you. Edwin asked, is it possible for someone on a visitor visa in Canada to take the CAEL test? And then I guess as a follow-up, what documentation would you need to provide during the test day?
I think you can take, the short answer is you can take the test on a visitor visa because effectively the CAEL will allow you to apply for admissions to university. So regardless of your status, this can be a separate application. In terms of the documentation that you need to present, typically a valid photo ID, a passport, a driver's license. In a lot of cases, a passport would obviously be the preferable choice because in a lot of cases you're applying from different countries that, for instance, may have requirements that are different than the Canadian ID requirements. So that would be the short answer. Beyond that, you don't really need. Some people ask whether they need transcripts from high school or some kind of vocational certification. I'm not sure if this is what our person is asking here, but that's not required. It's effectively just any documentation that allows us to verify your identity. And that's a very strict process, by the way, on test day, which is a requirement from both IRCC and the admitting institutions. So we will be very strict when we are confirming identity. So obviously the document itself has to be of high standard as well.
Great. How often can I retake or should retake the CAEL test?
So first of all, it's probably a good idea to, the reason why we keep saying take the sample test and also take the pre-test, which is it's effectively the test itself, that would give you an indication of the score that you are going to achieve. And the reason for it is we want all of these things to be free of charge. In other words, we will prepare you to the point where now you need to take the test and therefore you feel confident and you don't have to retake it. If you have to retake it, I will share the pertinent link here in the chat as well. So it is possible to retake it. But what we want to avoid is that we charge you for an additional sitting, effectively.
Right. Can you retake a single skill, or when you retake the exam, do you have to take everything?
We are working on retaking a single skill. At this moment, that's not an option, but we will be keeping people updated when it does become available.
Amazing. A couple questions here about CAEL in comparison to other language tests. I know we talked about the benefits of taking the CAEL exam during the presentation, but maybe you can summarize that again for the audience.
Yeah. The main thing that I would probably say is the following. So it's hard sometimes to talk about the specifics because the reality is that all of those tests that are accepted for admissions to universities are incredible. Like they're very good in their own right, just to put it bluntly. The thing that we keep hearing from our test takers is that on the one hand, CAEL is very robust and probably a little bit more academic in its nature than some of the other competitors. However, it's also very human, i.e. all of the resources that are available to you, they're effectively a way to study it, as I keep saying, study and learn, figure out where you are, have ample opportunity to understand what your expected score would be before you actually get there. And the third component here is the one that pertains to the speaking section of the test. We keep hearing that the difference there is that because you're speaking to a computer, a lot of folks who are not natural speakers or may be apprehensive about how they come across, the accent question that we heard a moment ago, those folks feel a little bit more at ease. In other words, it allows you to focus on hearing your own voice without necessarily worrying about how that's being perceived in real time. And of course, once that happens, of course, the assessment itself is done by incredible human raters. Whenever they don't agree, for instance, on a particular score, they would they will bring in someone else. But the point here is that during the test itself, folks feel a little bit more at ease. So to summarize it, robust, very secure, very comprehensive academic assessment that is also very human in the way it is designed and the level of support that exists.
Amazing. A question here quickly about the writing section and vocabulary and grammar. Essentially, the question is, what should I focus on when practicing for the writing section?
The one thing that comes to mind immediately is grammar and vocabulary, obviously important in all cases. But the other thing so you have to kind of build those as you go along. There is no easy shortcut. But the other thing that I think makes a lot of sense in terms of how you prepare is connecting the dots, as it were. Making sure that there is a cadence to your sentence structure, and making sure that I always repeat this to myself as well. Speak and write in paragraphs. And every paragraph has a statement and a conclusion, even if it's a short one. If you train yourself to think in those terms, particularly for the writing section, that goes a long way, because the way those are graded is, folks, even if you don't necessarily know the answer to a particular question, and what I mean by that is the answer could be like, tell me what we heard in the previous section, for instance. If you're not exactly sure about that, as long as you put your reasoning within a structure that is conducive to a paragraph cadence, it goes a long way. You can actually score a great deal just by doing that without even necessarily focusing on if you missed for some reason the actual answer from the previous section.
Right. Yeah, and lastly, we've got a question here, which I think is a great tone to end on, from Zara that came in through the registration form. And the question was, are there scholarship options for Canadian universities as an international student, and how can I find information on them?
Here, I will share another link. Well, actually, we've shared the link already to the rules and regulations for the scholarship grants that we offer. But the short answer to that is yes, there are 3 of those, 15,000, 10,000, and 5,000. These amounts just got increased because we don't feel that the previous amounts went far enough for folks. So these do. And I encourage everyone to go to CAEL.ca/scholarships. And just, it's a very short and easy process to apply. It literally costs you nothing. If you're preparing for the CAEL test, this could be a writing assignment that you can assign to yourself and just like do it for fun. It doesn't have to be long. It could be like 3 paragraphs. Again, practice what I was just telling you about a moment ago. And so I don't know if that made sense, but like the rules of participating or to be considered for the scholarships are effectively score 60 plus on the overall band for CAEL and submit a short essay telling us about you and the reasons why you've decided to come and study in Canada or a particular institution.
Right. Well, Ivan, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate the information that you shared with us, and also informing us about the scholarship, which I think is a fantastic program Prometric is launching. And I really encourage the audience to go check it out. That was at CAEL.ca/scholarships.
Correct.
Right. Once again, Ivan, lovely having you. Really appreciate coming out here. We will be doing more of these. So for the audience, look out for more emails about upcoming webinars. Thank you once again for joining, audience. As a reminder, you'll receive in 24 hours an email with the webinar slides. So in case you want to go over things in more detail, you'll get those, and a recording of the webinar. So if there's passages you want to rewind, or if you missed a part of the webinar, you'll be able to check it out there. Ivan, any closing words for our audience?
Just huge thanks to CanadaVisa and the team. Always just an incredible opportunity to connect with your audience. And to your audience, create an account, go apply for scholarships, know that we've got you. There's a lot of folks that have gone before you, and there's a great deal of resources capable of supporting your journey. We really are passionate about your success. So many thanks to all of you, and thanks, Riley, once again for having me.
Thank you. All right, everyone. Have a lovely rest of your day. Thanks for joining, and see you guys next time. Bye.
Bye.